A quick note of thanks to Josh von Schaumburg, yes, that is his real name, for throwing a couple bucks my way using the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show's notes to help support the podcast. Josh, much appreciated. And now, do you have a favorite newspaper? Do you have a columnist that you follow regularly? For many Chicagoans of a certain age, between the mid-1960s and the mid-1990s, that answer would have been Mike Royko, who wrote for three of Chicago's biggest newspapers 5 days a week for over 30 years, totaling more than 7,500 columns throughout his career. Today we're talking about Mike Royko, the toughest man in Chicago. I'm Tommy Henry, and this is the Chicago History Podcast. There is a Royko resurgence going on right now in 2024 with not only a Royko exhibition called Chicago Style, Mike Royko, and Windy City Journalism at the Newberry Library through September 28th, 2024, but also a new play called Royko, the Toughest Man in Chicago at the Chopin Theatre at 1543 West Division Street, which runs from September 5th through September 29th. I'm calling September 2024 the month of Mike. I had the pleasure of speaking to Mitchell Bisschop, who wrote the play and performs as Royko in The Toughest Man in Chicago. But before we get to that, a little background on Royko for those of you not familiar with the man and his work. Born in 1932 to a Polish mother and a Ukrainian father, Mike Royko grew up in the Humboldt Park neighborhood near Milwaukee Avenue, which at the time was predominantly a mix of working-class Polish, German, Ukrainian, and other immigrants. He graduated from Central YMCA High School and attended Wright Junior College briefly before dropping out to join the Air Force, where he spent 4 years in Korea as a radio operator and at O'Hare Field as editor of the base newspaper. In 1956, Royko applied to the Chicago City News Bureau and began writing articles for small Chicago neighborhood papers. The Chicago Daily News brought Royko on in 1959, and after covering local and state government stories, he started writing a weekly column about county government issues called The County Beat. Soon he was writing a regular column for the Daily News, with his byline appearing 5 days a week. Some of Royko's favorite topics in those early years, many of which remained favorites throughout his writing career, was Mayor Richard J. Daley and the Chicago political machine, national politics, race issues, generational differences, cultural trends, food, animals, sports. He also regularly published letters from his readers, along with his responses. Mike Royko's columns also featured fictional characters who often discussed matters of political and cultural importance. One of the most popular characters, Slats Grobnik, was portrayed as a native of the same area of Chicago as Royko. A Royko column from March 31st, 1972, described the young Slats Grobnik's reason for not believing in Santa Claus as, quote, "Anybody who can get in and out of that many houses without being seen is going to take stuff, not leave it," end quote. Royko collected several of the Grobnik columns in a collection titled Slats Grobnik and Some Other Friends, released in 1973. In 1969, E.P. Dutton Publishers approached Royko about writing a book on Richard J. Daley, who at the time was 14 years into his 21-year run as mayor of Chicago. Initially reluctant to take on this project, Royko was eventually convinced by the publisher, along with friend Studs Terkel, to pen the book. And in 1971, the widely acclaimed Boss, Richard J. Daley of Chicago, was published. The book garnered favorable reviews nationwide, but not everybody loved it. Royko painted a picture of Daley as a complex leader who was both effective and deeply flawed, with a leadership style that was often authoritarian and dismissive of anyone who didn't get in line. The National Tea Company stores, now known as Jewel Supermarkets, temporarily removed Boss from its book section, allegedly over the insistence of Daley's wife, Eleanor, who called the book, quote, trash and hogwash. The removal of the book spurred a boycott of the stores, and eventually boss Richard J. Daley of Chicago was returned to shelves. Royko received the ultimate recognition within his profession in 1972 when he was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Commentary. During his career, he received many additional honors, including the Washington Journalism Review's Best Columnist in America Award, the H.L. Mencken Award, and the Ernie Pyle Award. Royko also published 6 best-selling collections of his columns. After the Daily News folded in 1978, Royko moved to the Chicago Sun-Times, where his columns initiated criminal investigations and influenced political contests, including the mayoral election of Jane Byrne, who Royko called Little Miss Sourpuss. During the 1979 election, Royko's writing helped spotlight the shortcomings of the incumbent mayor, Michael Bilandic, particularly focusing on Bilandic's administration's failures, such as the mishandling of a severe snowstorm that paralyzed the city, which swayed support to Jane Byrne. When the Sun-Times was purchased by media mogul Rupert Murdoch in 1984, Royko quit the next day, saying, quote, "His goal is not quality journalism. His goal is vast power for Rupert Murdoch, political power." With the Tribune's nationwide syndication, Royko was soon appearing in 600 newspapers across the country. In 1995, Mike Royko received the Damien Runyon Award, given annually to the journalist who best exemplifies the style that made Runyon one of the best columnists of his day. In his acceptance speech, Royko reflected on how the newsroom had changed during his years in journalism. 40 years ago, we were on the tail of the front page era, Royko said. There was a different point of view. Reporters and editors were more forgiving of public people. They didn't think they had to stick someone in jail to make a career. Mike Royko loved baseball, even taking a turn in the team's booth as guest announcer after the voice of the Chicago Cubs, Harry Carey, had a heart attack in the late 1980s. Royko is a member of the 16-inch Softball Hall of Fame, having been a lifelong player of the sport and often writing about it in his columns. Royko could often be found at Chicago's famed Billy Goat Tavern, a popular spot for the city's journalists due to its proximity to the Tribune and the old Sun-Times building. Look for his picture and some yellow news clippings behind the bar. Another fun Chicago connection, Mike Royko was friends with the Belushi family long before John Belushi burst out of Second City and into Saturday Night Live and movies. John Belushi's uncle, Pete, was one of Royko's closest friends and was godfather to Mike's first child. John's father and Royko were also friends, and Royko remembered first setting eyes on John when he was about 5 years old. "I don't remember that he was very funny then," Royko shared after Belushi's death in March of 1982, "but he and the other Belushi kids were sure noisy." The 1981 film Continental Divide stars John Belushi as Ernie Sobczak, a much-beloved, hard-nosed Chicago Sun-Times newspaper reporter. After being assaulted by police officers for investigating a corrupt alderman named Yablonowitz, a very Chicago name, Sobczak is sent to the Rocky Mountains for his safety. There is no denying that screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan based the Sobczak character on Mike Royko. For early 80s views of Chicago alone, give this film a watch. Royko married twice and had 4 children. He first tied the knot in 1954 with childhood sweetheart Carol Joyce Duckman, with whom he had 2 sons, David and Robert. Carol Royko died suddenly of a brain hemorrhage in 1979 on Royko's birthday. Royko later wrote of Carol, "We met when she was 6 and I was 9. Same neighborhood street, same grammar school. So if you ever have a 9-year-old son who says he's in love, don't laugh at him. It can happen." The column ended with the following: "If there's someone you love but haven't said so in a while, say it now. Always, always say it now." Mike Royko eventually found love again, marrying Judy Arndt in 1985. The couple had 2 children, Sam in 1987 and Kate in 1992. Mike Royko became ill in March of 1997 while vacationing with his family in Florida. A month later, he was admitted to Evanston Hospital after experiencing chest pains at his Winnetka home and later underwent surgery at Northwestern Memorial for an aneurysm. Royko died in Chicago on April 29, 1997, from heart failure. He was 64 years old. Writers Rick Kogan and Jerry Crimmins said of Royko in his obituary in the Trib, "He wrote with a piercing wit and rugged honesty that reflected Chicago in all its two-fisted charm. His daily column was a fixture in the city's storied journalistic history, and his blunt observations about crooked politicians, mobsters, exasperating bureaucracy, and the odd twists of contemporary life reverberated across the nation." It was Royko's inimitable combination of street-smart reporting, punchy phrasing, and audacious humor that set his column apart, along with his remarkable durability in facing daily deadlines for more than 3 decades. Mike Royko is buried at Acacia Park Cemetery and Mausoleum at Norwood Park on the city's northwest side. Royko, the Toughest Man in Chicago, is a one-man show written and performed by Mitchell Bisschop, which explores Mike Royko's life through his columns, books, interviews, stories, and tall tales about Chicago's most popular columnist. Mitchell, I'm excited to talk to you about your Royko project, but first let's get a little background on you. Although you currently live in Los Angeles, you grew up in Chicago. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I grew up technically in Barrington, which always catches the ire of people who live in Chicago when you say, but when you live outside of Illinois, it's just the path of least resistance to tell people you grew up in Chicago. But when you're here, it's a big deal. So yeah, I grew up in Barrington, lovely 90s suburban existence in Illinois. Can't beat it. The mean streets of B-Town. I went to a lot of football games, Cub games, just exactly what people are thinking. Theater kid from Barrington. I came out of college. I went to college in Ithaca, upstate New York, and then moved to Chicago proper after college and did theater for about 4 years. And then decided I wanted to move to New York. I get happy feet wherever I go. I tend to want to move around a bit and explore other places, especially in my early 20s. And so going to New York seemed to be the logical step. And I did that for about 9 years. And then I ended up in Los Angeles, which I like very much. I like the weather. I like the people. I like the food. I like where I live. I can't beat it.
What high school did you attend? Did you attend Barrington High School?
Barrington High School. Go Broncos.
And
That's probably the first time I ever said that.
Do you remember your first interest in theater, how that came about, how old you were?
Yeah, well, I was in middle school when I took an interest in theater. My parents enrolled me in some it wasn't an after school thing. It was a summer program that was like kids theater in Palatine at Cutting Hall. And I ended up doing a lot of community theater during the summers at Cutting Hall in Palatine. That was great. It was just it taught you about being part of the community. It taught you theater is a very communal thing when you're not doing a solo show. But even when you are, you learn to work with people, you learn to do different jobs, you learn to pick up slack on things and work towards a common goal together. And so I just loved it. I liked it. It's team sports for theater nerds, and it was great. So I did that. And when I got to high school, I joined theater. I had a sort of a mentor who became a mentor in my life named John Faust. And we just did a lot of work together. And even after high school, him and I formed a Barrington community theater together. And we did a few plays, but then I went off, and I think he kept it running for a couple of years, and then that was it. So our first show was a show called Women in Wallace. And then the next year, when I came back from college over the summer, we did Ordinary People. So it was always about teen angst and whatnot. And that was sort of my intro was middle school. But then when I got to high school, it was full tilt. That was all I did. If I didn't do it in school, I was doing it out of school.
And so your parents were always supportive of your theater efforts, it sounds like.
Yeah, somewhat confused, but definitely I'm bored. I think they get very nervous to the lead up of anything that I do, and then once it starts, they're really proud and happy for it, But it's like they still get that nervous parent energy until the show opens, and then they're like, "It's great, you're fine."
Now, do they still have that now at your age, or was that back
Oh
then? And
yeah.
oh,
Oh,
really?
for
Oh,
sure. Yeah,
wow.
yeah. They don't even want to talk about they don't even want to talk about the show right now. But until it opens, they're gonna be, I'm sure, a nervous wreck in their own minds. And then once they see it, I think is the difference. They've seen the show too. They came to Los Angeles and saw it. They'll see everything that I put up, which is great.
Yes. So speaking of your parents, I know that I've read that you were not a reader of Royko. I think because
Right.
you're younger and he was kind of, out of the mix by the time you were of age to appreciate him. But were your parents or grandparents readers of Royko?
No, they were big daily news people when they moved to Chicago in the 70s. They were really big daily news subscribers. They loved the daily news. And then I grew up in Barrington, and the my brother and I really liked the Tribune, which he would have been in the Tribune at that point. But my parents actually, it's a funny story. They didn't like the Tribune, but they had gone on strike at some point, and my parents, that was like the final straw for them. So they didn't even like having the Tribune in the house. So my brother loved the sports section, and I loved but we weren't going to read the columnist on page 3.
The stuff that I've heard of you, it's talked about Ryko and it's talked about that stuff, but being a theater nerd myself, I appreciate hearing the stories of people who got into it in high school and then tried it a little bit after high school and then went, you know what? I'm moving to New York. And it's like,
Yeah.
holy cow, if I only had the guts to do that, I wouldn't have been any good anyway. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
cool that you did it.
Yeah, I mean, I crashed and burned in New York, but also it was more about the experience, and I've never quite found my footing, but that's okay. I mean, I dabbled and I did a lot of stuff, and I did stand up and improv and whatnot there, but I never totally felt completely at ease being there anyway. It was a lot of fun, lots of distractions, and it wasn't until I got somewhat, stable in Los Angeles and work and sort of mind, that I was able to sort of find a creative outlet and kind of revisit doing theater again and feeling good about it, joining cast and seeing a lot of theater. I see a lot of theater out there, and then just becoming part of the community as a solo theater artist.
Your new project, Royko, Toughest Man in Chicago, runs September 5th through September 29th at the Chopin Theatre here in Chicago in the old Polish Triangle. Follows Mike Royko, who was a columnist for 34 years. He worked for 3 major newspapers here in Chicago, wrote 7,500 plus columns. How did you narrow down your work from 7,500 columns? Because you're
Mm.
using Royko's actual words for the most part, right? How
Oh
did
yeah.
you narrow it down? I'm sure you are more well versed in Royko than people who knew him. How did you narrow it down?
Well, I mean, I did very, oh man, it's a tough question, because it's been like a 3-year journey, in doing this. So I started out by thinking the things that make him special in people's eyes are the writing. And the thing that people want to come to the theater and hear, the things that I wanted to highlight were the columns, and more specifically the columns that were great, because part of somebody who writes 7,500 columns in their career is that not every one of them is great, you know. But the fact that there are any that are great in a columnist's career is pretty remarkable, because these were meant to talk about that day or the day before, or somebody who died that week, who was in the zeitgeist at the time, which could have been anywhere from 60 to 30 years ago at this point. So to have this work, to start reading it, in my 40s, and have this work be so compelling to me, I wanted to kind of capture that for the audience. So it started with the columns. And then it was like, well, people don't want to sit and just watch me say columns on stage. That's not really theater. It's a lovely evening for people who really care about them, but it's not theater. And my brain always is going to default to the theatrical. So I wrote a script that used his words, had like other characters in it and everything that I would perform myself. And I did a little reading for a friend of mine in something like December of 2021. And I read it, and it was 3 hours, 3.5 hours long. That was the original script. And I mean, it was tiring, but you just have to kind of get it out there. And then from there, it's kind of like, a block of ice that you're trying to sculpt. You just whittle it down to what you think of the essentials. I'm a big person who believes in workshopping, in rehearsals. Nothing comes out of somebody perfect. And the more you put it in front of people, the more that people see it, the more that you're able to gauge people's reactions to things, the better the show comes. So taking it right to Chicago wouldn't have been an option for me. First of all, I didn't really have the connections at the time. And secondly, it just wouldn't be the show that I think it is today, which it combines not only his columns, but also things I've read about him, stories I've heard about him. And a lot of it, I mean, about 95% of it is words that he spoke in an interview. They called him up for a reaction to a Cub game that was like and I found that audio and I use it in the show. He wrote letters to his first wife, Carol, from the Korean War that they found, and his son, David, published these letters, because it was extra Royko stuff that his wife, Judy, found in their stuff, and David took and published them. And so I used some of the letters, so I really tried to. The show isn't just a biography. It's sort of an encapsulation of Chicago at this time, seen through the eyes of him, the world of journalism, which had a lot going on. The Daily News, his favorite place, shuts down. He goes to the Sun-Times. Rupert Murdoch buys the Sun-Times. He goes to the Tribune, which he, by all accounts, never really wanted to do because he had a feeling about the Tribune that wasn't necessarily positive. So I felt like there was a lot of drama, a lot of dramatic arc in that. And that's more interesting, I think, than somebody saying like, Mike Royko, born September 19th, 1932. Oh, doing all the things as him as a kid and stuff. Nobody wants to see that. You want to hear the columns. You want to hear little bits of his life, you want to feel the feels for Chicago and this nostalgia.
In addition to reading all of his stuff while researching, you talked to his family. You talked to Tribune writer Rick Kogan, who wrote Royko's obituary. Was there anyone you tried to contact who didn't want to be interviewed or didn't want to be part of this?
No, everybody was very open. I think some people were even sort of waiting for me to reach, they'd hear about it. I'd reach out to people and they say, oh, I heard about this, and some people even bought tickets before we've reached out to actually talk to them, who knew him well. So, no, I think I almost fear that I haven't reached out to enough people, and I'm forgetting people because it's the kind of thing where anybody that I would reach out to was going to be positive about it and something that I could glean and maybe include in the show as well. So it's been great. I mean, it's been a little intimidating as well.
One of the follow-up questions I had was there anyone you weren't able to reach out to, I mean, other than Mike Royko himself, that you wish you had? And it sounds like this is a project that could be ever evolving, where you could circle back in the future, depending on reception, and do Royko 2, still the toughest man in Chicago, and have an all-new approach to it. I'm sure this has been exhausting to put together in the first place, but there's so much information to glean from his life.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I always say this. I always say, this doesn't have to be the definitive Mike Royko play. It's what I dreamed of. And it's what I felt was the story here. The guy wrote 7,500 columns more in his life. And there's 100 different ways you could do a show only about his Cubs, a journey with him and the Cubs. You could do only about the bad columns, only the good ones, only the events he put on around town, because he did Royko's Rib Fest, but he also did a bunch of other goofy things like the Mongrel Dog Show in the 60s, and he did a penny pinching competition. He did all these strange things that sort of embedded him in the Chicago culture, with that much material, there's so many different angles you can take. And in that sense, it was a little overwhelming. I had to pick a track and stick with it. And I felt really comfortable about what I was doing because, I do this. So it's not the hardest thing in the world for somebody who's actually their mind thinks like that to kind of lock in on that. That was sort of my angle.
I had talked to the 16-inch Hall of Fame softball guys a couple years ago for a piece I was working on, and the
Nice.
number of Royko elements to their setup, even after all these years, they were like, it was great to have somebody like Royko who was so passionate about 16-inch softball around Chicago was a big help for them in trying to get people involved in it and trying to keep it active.
Yeah, I mean, him writing about it, that must have, just been a thrill because it is this very unique thing that is, only really happens here. It's interesting to even try to describe it to people outside of Chicago. There are inevitable question, which I don't even have an answer to, is like, well, why? It's one of those things.
You've been doing one-man shows for more than 10 years. Do you
Mm.
prefer one-man productions? Are you comfortable with a full cast? Do you like to have the control, or are you sometimes willing to just hand over and be part of the production?
It's a mix of both. I like the creativity outlet of doing a solo show. I like the ability to write anything and be able to perform it on stage without kind of the judgment. I like that as just a creative outlet. I think my brain works that way too. But yeah, I mean, I'm a team player, so I love being part of casts. I do. I think the tragedy is sometimes you get into a cast and you love the cast and you love the process and the show isn't very good and you're stuck doing it for 2 months. That is heartbreaking. I like the solo aspect is like it's me on the line, it's me doing the piece. I can sort of pull the cord at any point. I can change things at any point. I do like the control, but I also like in this particular scenario, I'm really not the one in control. At this point, I'm the actor and a little bit of the playwright still. And we have a week until the show opens. And it's nice to just have other people doing the things that they're doing at a creative level, things that I would never be able to do, building sets, doing the projections. I'm a video editor out in Los Angeles, and part of the shtick, I would say, of my solo shows is that they're multimedia heavy. They're media heavy. So I like to include the media aspect of it. But that's been really nice, passing that to somebody else and letting them sort of deal with it and seeing creatively what they come up with. That is, like I said earlier, the collaborative effort of a theater troupe, a group of people doing theater working towards this one goal is that they all bring something to the table. And that's really wonderful. So I like the collaborative efforts of doing theater, but the solo stuff is just kind of what am attracted to, like working towards. This is where my brain goes.
Royko Toughest Man in Chicago is a great title. How did you settle on that as the title of the play?
A lot of people in these interviews with Mike, or even back then in those days, like let's say the 70s, they always talk about toughness. They always mention him as being a tough guy. And they'd ask him, "Are you a tough guy?" And he'd say, "No, I'm not a tough guy. I'm a newspaper guy. I don't want to get into a fight with anybody." But people really had this perception that he would go after anybody, and that was kind of a sign of toughness. But in his own mind, he really didn't. He was afraid somebody was going to come up and whack him in the face or something like that. So, but I also saw a lot of other, Mayor Daley. The original Mayor Daley did an interview and they say, "Well, are you tough?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, and he had his own explanation about what tough was. Tough in Chicago meant something at some point, but it also doesn't mean anything, which is what I like about it because his stuff, Royko's writing is just as vulnerable as any, poem you'd read or anything like that when he allowed himself to be that way. And that's what good writers do, I think.
Care to share any of the other titles you had considered for this?
The Mike Royko Dancers. Uh, it was originally called just The Toughest Man in Chicago. And I added the Royko part because I thought, okay, well, people will recognize it. And it really did. So the idea that it was just called the Toughest Man in Chicago without Mike Royko's name on it always was kind of interesting to me because it allowed it to be less of a biography, and more of just sort of an encapsulation of a man and a time and a city. But I like that we added Royko because it's like nice, big. It's a good name. It's a strong name when it comes to a title. I was gonna call it actually something like one of his books. So he had a book called I May Be Wrong, but I Doubt It, which I liked that title a lot. But I just thought I thought this is more interesting. This is what it's really about. Someone who's got the perception of toughness, but that's not just who they are.
What do you miss most about Chicago?
Oh my gosh, being here for about a month now, there's so much. There's so much. The food, incredible. It's killing me. I'm not going to fit into my costume in a week and a half. As much as I live in LA and there's the ocean, I live on the other side of town and we just don't really do the crossover thing. So where I'm staying right now is I'm close to the water and I can walk to the beach and I can walk down the lakefront trail is amazing. I kept saying to a friend of mine in Los Angeles, I'm always wearing Bears and Cubs stuff or like a Twin Anchors shirt, And out here, I'm not special at all. Nobody cares. Nobody's walking down the street going, "Go Bears! Yeah, go Bears!" Like they do out there because there'll be the one Chicago guy in the neighborhood will say, "Hey, what's up, man?" But I miss being able to go to Cubs games. I go to a lot of Dodger games, but it'd be a lot better to see the team I like because going to baseball is great, but going to see your own team is even better. And Bears, going to see the Bears games, just being in that kind of environment. I've been away from Chicago for so long that I'm so used to running into a bar being like, "Do you have the Bears game on?" "No." "Okay, well, I got to go to the next thing." "Oh, we can put it on maybe over this." You just go anywhere here with sound or turn on your own TV and it's on. So I miss stuff like that. I don't miss the weather. That's the thing. I think I've been spoiled by the weather and it gives the illusion like it's going to be like this all the time. When in reality, I know in 2 months I'm going to be in a snowsuit while everyone else is in a light jacket.
Do you have a favorite hot dog place, favorite pizza place here in Chicago? I
Um,
know you don't have one in Los Angeles. Don't even try to get that across. But do you have one in Chicago?
well, I like the place for Italian beefs, the Byron's on Lawrence. I like for pizza, when I lived here, I used to always order the place Chicago Pizza on Lincoln. And as far as hot dog goes, I mean, Wrigley, just going to Wrigley and getting it there.
These are the true softball questions. Pizza, triangle cut, tavern style, or deep dish? How do you like it?
Oh, tavern style. The cut into squares. Thin crust cut into squares. It's so funny because in the show I talk about that, or I mean Royko talks about that. That's a part in it, and I love it so much because you're in LA and people say, or even New York. New York's even worse because they've got such an attitude about pizza. "Oh, that's not pizza. What's with that? That's not pizza." And I was like, "Yeah, but we don't really." I was like, in Chicago, like deep dishes for tourists. I mean, that's what we would say in LA because people annoy us by saying, "Well, that's not pizza. That's not pizza." And so to find a Mike Royko piece where he actually talks about this is beautiful. And so I was like, I have to put this in the show because it's not only funny and address it, but it educates people about how the true Chicago pizza is thin crust pizza, cut into squares, and deep dish is just tourists and suburbanites. People come into town, they got to get the deep dish in their minds. They got to take the architectural tour, which is amazing. And that's a Chicago trip to them, and they got to go to the top of the Willis Tower. And that's a Chicago trip to people. But, there's just so much more to this place. And that's like one of those things where it's like, if you're in the inn, I remember watching a Daily Show one time a lot of years ago where Jon Stewart made fun of deep dish pizza. And it made me so mad because I was just like, do your research, man. It's really not that big of a deal, but it is in the show, which I thought was great. I'm glad you brought that up.
You mentioned Twin
These are hard
Anchors.
hitting. These are hard hitting. Huh?
I'm
Yeah.
telling you, I told you, there'd be a couple of rough ones. Speaking of which, the next one should really throw you off. You mentioned you have a Twin Acres t-shirt. Do you have favorite bars in the city? Ones that you couldn't wait to get back to when you came to town?
Yeah, Simon's, Twin Anchors, love it. Miller's Pub, which is where my parents, being from the suburbs, my parents would come pick us up when we went to Bears games. We'd always meet at Miller's Pub. My favorite diner is a place called S&G's, Sam and George, on Lincoln, Southport, and Wellington. What other bars? I mean, it's tough because sometimes your favorite bar, Old Town, I like Old Town. Billy Goat, I got to shout out the Billy Goat. That's an old Mike Royko hangout. And that's another place where we go when we're downtown. Where else? I probably have a few more than somebody's out there screaming at their iPhone going, why isn't he mentioning our place?
The play is called Royko, Toughest Man in Chicago. My guest today is Mitchell Bisschop. And I got to tell you, I have tickets for opening night or September 6th.
Great.
So soft opening on the 5th. Opening night is officially the 6th, yes?
Yeah, we're doing a pay what you can preview on the 5th. So it's a preview. It may not have all the accoutrements that the opening night will. We're going to, figure it out, but it should be at least relatively close to the final product, if not the final product. And and then we hard open on the Friday, and then we're in business, like it or not.
Off and running. I'm excited to see it, and I'm excited I got a chance to talk to you today. Best wishes, break a leg, and enjoy your time here while you're in Chicago.
Thank you so much. I'm having a great time. Too great of a time. I have to buckle down and actually get to rehearsals now. But it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much.
Today's episode about Mike Royko was researched, written, and edited by me, Tommy Henry. Special thanks to my guest, Mitchell Bisschop, for taking the time to discuss his one-man Royko play. If you have an idea that you think would be a good fit for the Chicago History Podcast, I would be thrilled to hear about it. Send me an email at chicagohistorypod@gmail.com. I have links to some of the books I used in researching this episode in the show's notes. As always, any of the items you purchase through those links, not just the ones I've listed, may generate a small commission and help offset the cost of making this podcast at no additional cost to you. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please leave a 5-star rating or even better, a written review, especially if you listen on Apple Podcasts, as it will help the podcast grow and reach new fans. Your review may be featured on a future episode or on social media. The Chicago History Podcast logo and the art used on these social media pages was created by John K. Schneider. Thank you, John. If you need creative work done, email him at angeleyesartjks@gmail.com. I'll be back soon with another chapter in Chicago's history. Until then, get out and explore when possible. If you're in Chicago, make your way to the Newberry Library to see their Royko exhibition. And if you can, support independent stage plays by checking out Royko, the Toughest Man in Chicago at the Chopin Theatre. Learn more about whatever city you live in, and stay safe.